analog over digital. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Kurt Loder. This is Sheffield from Rolling Stone.
We're so sorry about the technical. We're just sorry, and not like takers, but we're just sorry in a general sense.
Time Warner.
It was Time Warner Cable.
Also, Eric Lefcowitz is the original Monkees biographer. The scholar. Apart from the great soundtrack, I think the most interesting thing about this movie is the backstory, right? Because technically, it's a mess, obviously. It's, the hand grenade editing, the autopilot surrealism, the dreadful solarization, and yet,
it's wonderful. I mean, I still get chills when Mickey hits the water and it turns to Technicolor. And then Carole King at her, I mean, her most, I'd say, spiritually transcendent. And this is when she was doing, Tony Stern collaboration. She had, moved on from Jerry Goffin, and it's just, it's suicidal and also liberating. And there are things that this film makes me feel that put all of the stuff that you just said to the side.
Also, it really looked like it was when they go underwater, they merge with the porpoise people, and they get the kiss of life. It looks from Lana Del Rey in her first cinematic performance. Everybody's in this movie somewhere.
Eric, where did the Monkees fit in their time? Because at the time they were a joke. Everybody laughed at the Monkees. It was stupid. They didn't do their own music. Not entirely true. But obviously, there are people who still remember their stuff today and still love it.
Well, you can see the whole film as like a bid for credibility, that they were lacking credibility, except for their peers. They were hanging out with the Beatles. They toured with Jimi Hendrix, Buffalo Springfield, Neil Young. They're on the soundtrack. Their peers actually appreciated them, Frank Zappa. But the general public was getting suspicious of their motives, and so they were looking for credibility. When they made the movie, they were the hottest band in the world. By the time the movie came out, they were already the coldest band in the world. So this movie really bombed. It never really opened.
Because their series had just been canceled.
The series had been actually canceled, and they thought they would extend the concept of the series to the psychedelic format. And basically, the public wasn't having it. The fans were alienated, and the critics really had at them, so they really got nobody.
How did they come out of all this? Did they ever get any money out of it, or are they all
Poorly. They went on strike just before the film, and they kind of lost the strike. They wanted a screenwriting credit for the film, so they settled for $1,000. After the film came out, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, the producers, Bob Rafelson, the director, went on to produce E.G. Rider. So about a year later...
Three other films with Nicholson. You worked with Nicholson further.
Yeah, Nicholson came on to the next film. In fact, Nicholson took that helmet that Mickey
for
wears,
Easy Rider.
and then he used it in Easy
Is
Rider.
that true?
Yeah. Let's just say it's the same helmet.
Very similar. It's a
Very similar concept. So Bob and Bert, they went on to become countercultural heroes. The Monkees, I kind of liken them to orphans left on the doorstep after this. Their careers were over.
So sad.
Yeah, it is very sad.
I think it's interesting that the Monkees' music, actually extended the rule building era quite a bit, because that was breaking up with the advent of the Beatles. Nobody wanted to hear about bands that needed songs written for them anymore. They wanted bands who wrote their own songs. So the Monkees were perfect for like Carole King and Jerry Goffin and Man and Wow, all these people, to give them great, and Neil Diamond too, in their first two singles, to give them these great songs. I think that's one reason why this album is so wonderful. It's a great album, and their earlier records also. Would you agree, Rob?
I would certainly agree. Also, it was a chance for the Brill Building to move on, for Carole King to go on and do more ambitious psychedelic adult stuff. Porpoise Song, one of my favorite songs Carole King ever wrote, As We Go Along. It's the Walking in the Snow one. I guess after the Beatles' help, every rock band movie had to have a walking in the snow pensively scene. So the Ticket to Ride scene in Help becomes the As We Go Along scene in this movie. And that song just like kills me. That is just the most beautiful song. And you know, that's Carole King. That's the kind of song she couldn't have written for the artist that she was working with. The Monkees and Carole King and that school of songwriting was a very mutually beneficial kind of connection.
Unfortunately, that Porpoise Song kind of bombed. I mean, it peaked at 62 or something. Amazing.
It's also worth noting that Harry Nilsson had a song on the soundtrack, and then the Monkees gave Nilsson their first paycheck so he could quit his job at the bank. And,
can you imagine like going to the bank and seeing Harry Nilsson on the other side of the teller window and being
Humming
like,
to himself.
yeah, be like, I don't like the money, I'll go to the next window. Right?
And that's a nice thing about the Monkees is that they got their friends involved. That's why Buffalo Springfield is on the soundtrack. And Tony Basil was dancing with Davy, and she, of course, had a big hit with Mickey, coincidentally. And they gave a lot of breaks to people, and that's not often remembered. But they brought a lot of people in, you know, because they had the money at the time, so they could afford to, you know, loan their large ass out to a bunch of emerging artists.
Do you think they were trying to specifically kill off this group by making this movie?
I don't think
Rafelson
the Monkees
and
were.
Shiner.
I mean, I think the Monkees thought that they were making their first major motion picture and that they were going to make more, and this was the beginning of something. And when I talked to Bert and Bob, the producers, they were really clear that they wanted this to be the end of the Monkees. And I understand that when the Monkees found out about it, when they read the book, that they were actually a little upset because they actually never knew that. So it was, there were a lot of hard feelings.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that it's so disappointing when risk is rewarded with failure. Like, they even let Peter sing.
Dig it.
He was pretty good.
So good.
Or no, do I have to do this all over again? That was him. He sounded great. And it didn't matter. I always like playing the game when I watch this movie, like, when do the preteens walk out?
Well, Pauline Kael wrote a review in the New Yorker of the film and said, the greed and pretensions were enough to make a pinhead walk out. So, there you go.
And we all stayed.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is that when Jack Nicholson became a star several years later, the film was reevaluated by those same critics. And since then, the critical standing of the movie has risen. And now it's definitely regarded as a cult classic.
It's still an awful movie, though. I think we can say it's still a really badly made. It's badly made.
That's not the
It's a
mystery
great
tour.
movie, but it's really badly made.
Better than Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, that's true.
Some of the
True. I mean, just because something's really badly made doesn't mean there aren't qualities that we respond to.
I will say
But it's badly made.
I will say this about Head. If you don't like it, you wait 2 minutes and something new is going to happen.
Not necessarily something better, but something new.
It's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit, I think it took where the series left off and made it sort of a 480. It reminds me of those early Python movies where they were just sort of, you know, strewn together vignettes.
Yeah.
There's lots of great scenes. I think the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. And then there's all these lines that, you know, I quote with, like, my friend Seth, you know, like, how's about some more steam, or nobody lends money to a man with a sense of humor, and on and on. So I actually remember lots of parts of this film.
Oh, yeah,
I don't
there's
remember
very great
everything else.
moments. The mom and dad's song thing is wonderful.
Oh, Daddy's Song. That's
So good.
That's brilliant.
the interesting thing about Daddy's Song is that I feel like that marks the end of Act 1 and the beginning of Act 2. I feel like after that it goes into its own new direction.
It's supposed to be incredibly linear and good.
Yeah, it's like the Full Metal Jacket of psychedelic movies. Well, but I will say that, I mean, like I said, I like to play the when would you walk out, whether you're a tween or otherwise with this. And I know they didn't mean to be flippant about Vietnam, but like, boy, were they flippant about Vietnam. To Circle Sky of all songs, I mean, it's not
What's
a
amazing
protest
too,
song.
though, that the movie was rated G.
That's true.
Most of it is.
Bring the kids.
I'm sure the kids, I'm sure the parents who were like, man, you know, like, it's challenging.
Yeah. Now, I don't think a lot of kids saw this film, but Quentin Tarantino swears that his parents took him to this film.
Well, he won't speak to his dad. I saw it when I was a little girl. My brother took me to the video store, and I'd seen all the Monkees episodes. I was completely obsessed with the series, and it was like the last thing that I hadn't seen. Similarly, I saw like Batman, the movie with Adam West, you know, after you watch all the series. And I took it home, and I think I got to the Terry Garr scene, and I was like, I can't do this. This is scary. This is weird. This is not like the show, and it's just not for me. And then, of course, later in high school and college, I was just like, oh my God, this is the best thing in the world because it combined, you know, nostalgia and like highbrow, lowbrow, and psychedelic.
I'm guessing drugs might have intervened. Those two time codes, I'm guessing.
This is an intervention, right?
I remember watching a Monkees documentary where Davey was talking about Head. He thought it was a mistake. He said the movie we should have made was Ghostbusters. When you think, I mean, apart from just the greatness, I guess Nesmith would have been Bill Murray.
Oh, yeah. Although he could have been Egon. He could have been Egon. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Terry Garr Sigourney, like,
Yeah.
that's a door that could have been open. No, who would have been Sigourney?
Who? Nico.
Nico.
They were destined to, I think, burn out fast. You know, I think that was the nature of a pop phenomenon like this.
I think they would have stayed together if this movie were a hit, or whether they'd fallen apart naturally, because obviously they were flaking off, right?
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, Peter left the band first. They made a TV special, which is actually weirder than this film. Afterwards,
The one with Jerry Lee
33
Lewis
Revolutions
and
for
Little
Mars.
Richard.
Yeah.
which was
Great.
it helps to maybe be slightly medicated to watch. I loved it, but I think they were meant to, last a certain amount of time, and I think they came back big time, of course, in the 80s for MTV, that little network. Put them back on. So they had a huge reunion, in that year. But I think they were destined to only last so long.
Yeah. But Mickey has an album coming out next Tuesday. Anybody heard it? How is it? I would imagine somebody would have heard it, but I haven't. Nobody here has heard of it. I've seen someone on Twitter said it's solid.
Now, by the way, in my opinion, Michael Nesmith had the most credible music career out there. And we invited him tonight
He's here.
because he
He's in
was
New
in
York.
the city. Yeah, he was at Christie's. Yeah. Shut up.
He has a restraining order against
Mike?
me sexually. I swear to God, I see a white turtleneck, aviator glasses, and sideburns, and I have to take a nap.
Anybody with a wool hat on?
So what was he doing here?
He was at a Christie's auction.
I'm sure there's a very deep story there. So
I'm sure he is.
I don't have time to go into it, really.
Eric, the last time I saw you, Davy Jones had recently died, and I remember you had a really interesting theory about Davy in this movie, as far as like the other monkeys maybe looking to humiliate him a little.
Yeah, well, that's my theory. In the song, Daddy's song, his big song and dance routine, that at the end of the song, they cut the soundtrack, and you just basically hear him singing live. And you go kind of a little pitchy, you know, and I thought that was really exposing him in a way, you know, by the filmmakers. They could have done something that maybe burnished his image a bit more.
He's like punched in the face, and like he doesn't, and like even the violin on that cello thing's got a little bit more edge to it than like the other vignettes, maybe.
Yeah. It's I have to admit, I had a little moment watching this film, watching Davy sing that song. You know,
Great, yeah.
you know,
It's uncut Davy. It's the Daviest moment of the Davy moment. I felt that this was what he was really psyched about. I mean, the dancing is so Davy's unique terpsichorean style. Nobody ever dances like that. You can tell by
Nice Broadway background.
yeah, like it's amazing that what he does with the shoulders. And if anybody was lucky enough, God bless them, to see them on their tour last year, and you saw Davy move, that was just like unbelievably beautiful. He was just unbelievable all throughout the show, doing the boogaloo. He did like She Hangs Out. I was like, I can't believe he's doing this one. He was boogalooing like it was like he was in his blood. And he kept going. That show, was like 40 songs or something. 42. It was the whole suite of songs from him. And Daddy's song is really, that's Davy's spirit. That's his idea of showmanship. It's all in that scene.
And it's a showstopper. I mean, there's no question.
yeah. No, I think Davy is the one who naturally would have gone on, I think, to have a career. And at the end of his life, he was saying that he should have gone back to acting school and gone back to acting. And I think in the film, it really bears that theory out. I think he's really a good actor. He has an incredible screen presence. And it's kind of amazing that the only thing he did of note was the Brady Bunch, afterwards.
I think Michael Nesmith was seriously pursuing like a big-time career after the Monkees. I mean, he did so much great stuff, but he wasn't taking like your usual route to stardom. It's just too laconic to do that.
I think he was too big of a thinker, not too laconic as much as I think he was just so entrepreneurial. Like he wanted to do everything. He wanted publishing. He wanted video. He wanted, to create the internet before there was an internet. If anything, it was, in the essence of experimentation and knowing that he got fucked in the publishing realm of the songs that he gave away, and sort of figuring out, all right, how am I a businessman and creative, and kind of figuring out what that meant for him, from my understanding of his career.
Where do you think the money went? Any guesses? I mean, it didn't go to them, right? So,
No. I mean, well, they did okay.
And like, no?
Their original publisher, Don Kirshner, made a boatload, and then they got rid of him. Basically, they signed a terrible contract, and they also signed away their images and their lives in a way, because they played themselves, which I think is an interesting
you
thing.
don't know yourself anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's the odd thing. Speaking of which,
Glad you asked.
I've got coins with their faces on them.
Maybe you could explain what those are.
I'm sorry, where did the money go, Kurt? The money went here. These are coins with Monkees
These are
images.
cool. It seems weird that Eric just took out a Ziploc bag that you can't see. But they are.
There was a lot of that in the making of this movie.
Yeah.
Some hydroponic coins, yeah.
But these are coins with the monkeys' heads on them. It's really, it's very cool. It's just not ideal to see them from
He
screen.
made them in China. Had them made in China.
If you want to buy my book, which I updated a couple of years ago, and I'll give a coin till they as for the commoditization, what's the word? How do you say that?
We know what you meant.
Yeah.
Yes. The Monkees were, they were minted in all sorts of ways. They were, they were probably the first band after the Beatles to really be stamped out in some mechanical way, and the Monkees didn't see that money. And they had no managers. That was the interesting part, was that nobody managed the band. So they were all on their own. So after it was over, they were on their own.
So sad. It's actually a very instructive music business story. I mean, it's like the music business writ large. You play yourselves, you get nothing. That's it. You're just left with zero.
I do think that their story really is like a paradigm. I mean, you could really see a lot in their story about giving up your image and giving up the rights to your characters and for fame. It's the old story, but all roads kind of connect to the Monkees eventually.
Did they stay friends after they started falling out? I mean, Peter Tork left, Michael Nesmith left. Was it still in communication, or were there hard feelings?
I can't comment.
I
But you know.
I get in
But you
trouble
know.
every time I
He
say
knows.
something.
He knows. You won't say it. I'll speculate. I think Mickey and Davey were simpatico because they're both actors. No, he's saying no with his head and face, but they still collaborated for a time after the Monkees split up.
I think they were like spiritually compatible. Were they like porpoises swimming in the same ocean?
I think they were all.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. And it's interesting too that like Nesmith and Tork were like the two musicians, but they were such different musicians.
Yeah,
I mean,
they didn't get along for sure.
I can't imagine that they would, like just because they both know how to play the guitar. I mean, Peter was from the Village, and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Nesmith was this. Yeah, completely different people. I mean, all four of them were really different, but.
I think they had a deep spiritual, bond. Would be the nicest way of saying it. I think they really feel like they're connected through this thing. But as for hanging out, I don't think they did a lot of that.
I'm guessing nobody talked to Bob Rafelson much after this movie came out.
He was probably too busy making new cinema.
That's true.
Can you
Inventing the
imagine if like
70s.
this was your first movie and then all of a sudden you were like, the leading man in Easy Riders, Raging Bulls? I mean, it must stink to be like, oh yeah, that was like my college film that I made.
They had actually a deep and abiding love, Riggs and Schneider, for the film. And Nicholson as well has only been quoted once or twice on it, and apparently he loves it as well. We haven't talked about Jack Nicholson, who's deeply involved in the film.
Scoring dope, I think.
Nicholson or Nesmith?
Oh my
You
god!
have to choose.
Fuck Nicholson, marry Nesmith.
By the way,
Is there a kill?
Oh wait, did you have a suggestion?
Who's killed?
Kirshner, because he said already.
Nicholson's girlfriend was the girl kissing all
That
the
wasn't
guys in the first film.
Carol Doda, was it? Was that
No, Carol Doda's in the boxing scene.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Carol Doda was one of the first strippers to bare her body.
augmented breasts.
Augmented breasts.
Those look real.
Does anyone have any questions out there? Not that I can tell you this.
You guys talked about how they were victims of the industry, but obviously something prompted them to sell the podcast. So I'm wondering what that was. Where were they in their agency? They had to sign a contract.
Nascent is the operative word. I mean, what was Davey, 19 or something? And like Nesmith was the oldest, and he was 21.
I think Peter was, but
Yeah.
they were all young. I think what prompted them was this is a huge opportunity, and Davey. It's little known that Davey was actually signed to Columbia Pictures Screenjacks beforehand. There's kind of an idea that they all auditioned for the show, but Davey was a shoe-in. He was already signed. So the other guys, it was really, I mean, Mickey seems like a natural now looking back on it. You know, what would they have done without Mickey's pop voice? And I think, you know, Peter was really the street character, the guy that they got off, you know, they found him washing dishes, basically.
Didn't Steven Stills have lousy teeth? That's why they didn't like him. So they got Peter instead.
Yeah, recommended Peter. Yeah.
But also, like, just to speak to the desperation, like, look at American Idol and all those kids waiting out in the rain, and they're going to sell all of the rights to anything that they could possibly do for an opportunity. I mean, I think it's part of the...
I think looking back, you can say, well, they really got treated badly, but at the time, somebody comes up and offers you all this money, and sort of put you on a TV show, you're going to be stars, and you can say yes. You blame them. You can understand their fury, and they find out what's being done. It's understandable what they did.
The really amazing thing is this mix of personalities and talents that, with them being, I mean, you talk a lot about how they've been victimized in terms of the industry, but what they created in those conditions, it's really kind of miraculous that it was these four guys with these four different personalities, and they all shine, they all shone in this movie in individual ways, as well as in teamwork ways. And the really surprising thing to me about the Monkees story is not how screwed over they were, which is a very old and traditional showbiz story, but that so much awesome came out of it, and that so much of that awesome was stamped with their very distinct and very strong personalities, and that, you know, that we respond to Davy in a Davy way, Mickey in a Mickey way. They were not interchangeable. They were, in a very real sense, just very
unique.
Yeah.
Also touchable. I think the thing about the Monkees was that they were one of the first acts that you could really relate to them as real people, even though obviously they were, you know, a manufactured image, as they say in the song in the movie. But there is something touchable and real about them, and I think there was a little bit of reality TV in their show, if you watched the episodes, where they would interview the guys at the end of the show and break like the fourth wall and actually talk to them directly. And there's a lot of that in this movie as well. So we felt like we knew these guys, and I think that was unique.
I think it's sort of ironic that they got put down so much for not being able to play, not being real musicians, but their entire legacy is these great records. And they really are phenomenal records. They're so well done, they're so well written.
It's funny when you said that Porpoise song peaked on the charts at number 62, and I was
Amazing.
It's amazing. And I was like, man, there are a lot of records that peaked a lot higher that week. That like a room full of people singing goodbye, goodbye, like I mean, it's really amazing that the music that came out of this situation is so excellent, yes, and so them, like in a very irreducible way. That the image of the group might have been manufactured, but they were not. Like they were not manufactured, and like you said about them being very relatable and real, that comes across with all four of them. That's like you
Are there
can't.
any other questions?
Can't manufacture those.
I've got a question.
Someone has a question.
A question I have: how did the Davy Jones Brady Bunch like brand partnership come to be?
I can't speak. The question was, how did the Davy Jones Brady Bunch thing happen? And I can't really speak to that. Do you know, Eric?
And he was getting a lot of shots on TV afterwards, so I guess it was just another, sitcom that he was on. I don't think it was meant to be as classic as it came out. It's too bad he didn't get his own show, because I think Davy could have. I think Davy's a great actor, actually, but I don't know the circumstances behind it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's in a vault. No.
There's probably a lot of them too, I would imagine.
There's some alternative scenes. There's 4 scenes in the black box, apparently. And we only see a couple, like, I think 2 or 3, but apparently in the original script there was more. But Bob Raven's is not going to let it be released.
Absolutely.
Baseball Hall of Fame? Any Hall of Fame.
I think they might get a shot soon.
Nicholson Schneider collection, and you find these pieces of this. There's a short piece about Head, which Jack Nicholson says that he approached Kurt Schneider with two scripts for the movie. One that would make a lot of money and one that would flop, and Schneider picked a flop. Any comments on that?
I haven't heard that story. Have you heard that? Brad,
Okay, you would know.
Yeah. Well, I watched it today, in fact. Nicholson tells the story that he told Bob Raven to write a script, and he said, okay, write the Monkees. And he said, okay, and then goes to Bert Schneider with 2 ideas. He tells Bert Schneider, okay, I got one movie that could be as big as Hard Day's Night, and the other one will not make a dime. And Schneider says, make the second one.
That doesn't sound like Hollywood somehow, but
I
maybe,
wonder
I suppose.
what the moneymaker, what the plot of it was.
I've always wondered what the first script was.
I don't think that script has been found, but maybe
I can't see beyond the front row, but well, back there.
Oh, I was just wondering which scenes you guys find the most entertaining / baffling. Like just individually, which ones you enjoy the most.
Well, the musical numbers are sort of their own category, aren't they? Just in the way that, like, your favorite part of a musical is always going to be the, Daddy song or
It's like Elf.
Porpoise song.
You
Yeah.
just fast forward through it.
But baffling, probably that actor we were talking about backstage in that slurring.
Timothy Carey.
Yes! What is that? That is crazy. It still makes me uncomfortable to watch his, tongue trying to escape his mouth. And in some scenes, the noose is around his neck, and in some scenes, it isn't. It's what is that? It's beyond baffling to me. Yeah.
Talk that way always. He's in, as Kurt said, every bad movie ever made. Film noir tough guy. He's great in Kubrick's The Killing, which was 10 years earlier. He's the guy who shoots the horse. Spoiler. It's like halfway through the movie, and he has that distinctive voice. He's just a lot younger, and yeah, pops, red lightning, and that when we saw, every time we see this movie, my wife and I, every time we see it, there's more wait, that wacky guy from that movie is in this. And the last time we saw it at the Altamar's Parties Festival a few years ago in the Catskills, they showed it on the screen at 2 in the morning. It was amazing. It was my first time ever seeing it in an audience. This is my second. And it was astounding that it was wait a minute, this guy in this movie that we've seen 100 times is in this. It's so weird, all the weird people who will just show up in this movie. I guess that's the baffling, that's the part that always baffles me.
Yeah. Do you think movies like this are still being made, or can they still be made? Would you make one?
I would be thrilled. Is this an offer? Do you have a check in your back pocket? I would be thrilled to. I love. It sort of does come from the mad kind of world, or almost like Cannonball Run-ish, right? Don't you think? Where the more is more, sort of Battle of the Network Stars philosophy of is Kurt Zappa available? Well, then clearly you should be in it. I have a poster of Head in my apartment, and my favorite quote, because it was clearly the nicest quote that they could find, was I guess from Variety, and it just says, "It combines all genres of film, westerns, military, and musical." And then it said, "It's memorable." And that was clearly the nicest thing they could find to say about it.
People are still making crazy movies, but big studios aren't. This is like a big studio picture. They must have just been rearing back in horror.
Well, yeah, the budget alone, when you're those overhead shots of the desert and the tanks and all the extras, and you're
Terrible effect.
It's interesting that this was the most biggest bomb in Columbia Pictures history.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a large statement.
It made $16,000 and it cost over $1 million, which at the time was a lot of money. So, and it's never played in the same city. I mean, in two cities on the same night, ever in its history. Wow. In fact, it's probably the only screening it's had this year.
Eric, excuse me. It has a movie made back in 20 cents. It was released.
I'll email Bob. I don't know.
I don't think anybody's saying.
Might have.
Is there anyone else out there? Yes.
Can you talk a little about the book and the movie The Wrecking Crew? Because I feel like it's totally vindicated the Monkees because nobody played their instruments and somehow they became the whipping boys. It was like and it became an issue with them. But I mean, Pet Sounds is by the same musicians that played all the first two albums of the
Television.
Monkees.
It's television.
You
Television
Yeah,
is the
and
like.
Al Blaine is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Whoever played, playing the drums.
Well, you're talking, you mean the Wrecking Crew,
The Wrecking
Phil
Crew.
Spector, all of those guys.
Phil Spector, all
Yeah.
the same.
Well, they're session musicians. They did play on some great records, but I
They
think everyone.
played on everybody's records.
Yeah.
But somehow it became an issue just with Monkees. So do you think that's going to change? I mean, for me, it's changed everything. Take the whole way I look at 40 years, 50 years.
But the Wrecking Crew guys didn't make Beach Boys records without the Beach Boys.
They
didn't make
the
records
Beach
without
Boys were
Brian
on the
Wilson.
road. The Beach Boys were on the road, and
I think
Wilson.
Yeah, they played on it.
The first
But they weren't
They-
Brian Wilson. They weren't Phil Spector. They couldn't do it on their own. They were session musicians.
Right, because they did the same thing on the Beach Boys, the Mamas and the Papas. Because you mentioned that they did on the Monkees album.
I think the Monkees got a bad rap because television was considered
Oh, yeah.
to be particularly, artificial. I think that TV is the extra element to that. Like if there had been, a Beach Boys television show, they wouldn't have been taken seriously.
And also, they were seen to be imitating the Beatles, who famously could play everything. And I think that made them look really bad. They were sort of set up to take that rap. It is unfortunate.
But the amazing thing was that they actually felt like they had to play their own instruments, so they morphed into a real band and made a record called Headquarters. A great album. And
second best-selling album in 1967, right? After Sgt.
Sgt.
Pepper.
Pepper.
1 and 2 the whole year. Yeah, amazing.
Well, not just that they had to, but they wanted to. Except for Davey, who didn't care. Davey was just like, just make sure that the paychecks are coming. And he didn't want to rock the boat, but Mike and Peter and even and Mickey were like, we want to play. That's sort of what you're supposed to do. It's the late 60s. That's what musicians do, make their own music.
It's interesting that Davey hadn't really sung one of their major hit songs until Daydream Believer, which saved the Enterprise. It was kind of like shaky, and Daydream Believer came out. That kind of cemented their pop fame, I think. That song is a classic. And I don't think Davey wanted to go, indie, like they did. But, they did play on Daydream Believer. The Monkees actually play on that song.
It's also said that the Beatles actually had a certain fondness for them.
They love the
Which
Monkees.
is really interesting.
Timothy Leary loved the Monkees. I mean, they had credibility from the people that, but it's also just like, that could be considered the elite, in its own right.
I kind of see it as like Andy Warhol's factory on the West Coast is really what was happening.
Yeah.
So when I see this movie, I see kind of like Monty Python before the flying circus even started, in the way that it's like stream consciousness and interconnected sketches and how it's all elliptical and comes back in. And also it's just like hilarious throughout in a really weird sideways way. Or like the interview pieces at the end, that's like straight up Monty Python. Do you think that, I know this is wild speculation, that if the Monkees were more positioned within that comedy tradition rather than as a solidly musical act with a comedy side gig, that, pop culture history would be kinder. Especially considering how great and consistent the performances are throughout this. Mickey Dolenz is hilarious.
I think it's a good point. I think history's been pretty kind to them, actually. I think it's, in the you know, people are getting it finally, but there's all sorts of stuff in the head that you see later on in comedy, like Mel Brooks and Blazing Saddles breaks through the proscenium, or Steven Spielberg with this kind of like gun, you know, coming out, the cannon coming out in this scene, you know, all sorts of stuff comedically, you know, was ahead of its time. But it's also a pretty, you know, psychedelic movie, and I don't think psychedelic movies, there's not a whole lot of psychedelic comedies after this one.
There's always Skidoo.
Yeah.
You guys catch them up.
But I think that the show very much towed the line. Like, they gave them improv classes. They were very much, you know, planning to make them the Marx Brothers meet the Beatles. They, I think, studied with Del Close at one point. Like, they were really in a position to be, like, you know, they were goofing around all the time and improvising, and people who were less comfortable with it got more comfortable with it before they even, you know, shot their first pilot. They would go, what was that meeting that they went to, and they, like, jumped in the fountain, like, it was like an upfront or something?
Well, it's like one of those obscure facts. There's endless trivia when it comes to the Monkees. But before the show was on the air, there was a meeting of the affiliates of NBC.
Affiliates, right.
And the Monkees showed up in God knows what state, you know, and they just started riffing and improvising because that's what they had been taught to do. And a bunch of affiliates actually declined to show the series, so it never actually had that great a rating because it wasn't shown in certain markets. They blew that one.
They might have needed a manager, perhaps.
Yeah.
Somebody to rob them a little more. Yes, back there.
I have two questions. First of all, it seems like Mr. Loder doesn't really like the movie, so I'm curious about what you do like about the movie.
I love the music in the movie. I think it's brilliant. It's so well done, and it's that album just by itself is transport. I think it's a great, great record. I just don't think the movie's very good. I'm sorry. Technically, there are good things in it, but technically, I don't think it's very well done. Okay, I want that. I take that back. Who's going to handle that one?
Eric.
What he said in his statement was that Davy's death made him realize that he's not going to be alive forever, and that the time to do this, if he's ever going to do this, is now. That was his really specific, and for him, it seems unusually emotional and direct thing was, he said that, you know, this guy died and I realized that, you know, we might not get a chance to do this again.
And you guys want the dirt, so beyond that, there was a plan to do a headquarters show. You know, like a lot of bands are playing their full records and concerts. So Mike was going to be a part of that show, and Davey wasn't. But so there was a plan to get together with those three guys, and that's what I understand. But you know,
I think after a certain point, you shouldn't get back together. You know? I mean, like the Rolling Stones, they should keep doing this. The Who should stop years ago. I really think they shouldn't keep coming back, especially when one of your members dies. Like,
Oh, but when one of your members dies, then you get to have one of those contests where they're like, who's going to be the next Robert Hutchins?
Yes.
And weren't they auditioning like a Jim Morrison at one point?
They did. They toured with Ian Astbury The role of the Lizard King tonight will be played by Mr. Astbury. No, I respectfully disagree. I think breaking up blows, it's over. Breaking up is over. Nobody breaks up anymore. Every band, because that's the only place they make money is on the road, so everybody who can do it does it. I have, like, completely lost my ability to not think that's awesome. I've seen some really shitty reunion shows in my life, some of them on this stage, and I have always been glad that they happened. There was not one that made me like any band song one iota less. I did musicians doing something other than playing in the band that they were in that was actually good. I think that idea that there's something wrong with that, I think that is kind of phased out of history. And at this point, especially like with that, like we mentioned, the trend of people getting together to do their album all the way through, and not we're going to do, the new song that, we're going to pretend that we wrote, new songs, or we're going to do the reggae version. We're going to play the songs you like in the order you like. I think that's a beautiful.
Well, yeah, so it's something about a cover band, essentially, a really high-level cover band. Which is all right. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's somehow ungratifying.
But I mean, it's funny for this kind of band where this sort of affection that lingers on for the Monkees, it's a pretty fanatical cult. Monkees fans tend to be pretty crazed, right? Yeah. You probably hear from a lot of them, and Monkees fans are intense. That's a serious devotion.
Last week I saw my name having to do with this event crossed out on somebody's website, and the word asshole inserted.
That's devotion.
Yeah. I was kind of proud of it.
It's like a scene that would be in this movie.
Is there anyone else out there that has a question? Yes.
This is a theory that I've had since I was in high school and first saw that. Like, everybody would tell me how great Pink Floyd The Wall was. And I finally saw it a few years later, and my thought has always been, Pink Floyd The Wall just stole from head and just had to have better marketing. Thoughts? My way out of
I do think it's like they say about the Velvet Underground record that, everybody who heard it made a band, I think that a lot of people saw this film, went on to do, other things. I know it's been very influential on a bunch of film directors, and I do think it's an influential film. I don't think a lot of people have seen it.
I think you also have to acknowledge, I think, the influence of the Richard Lester films from the mid-60s, Hard Day's Night. I think that they were very influential on a lot of things, and this movie reflects that.
Or Tommy. I mean, you look at Jack Nicholson's project Ensuing and singing sincerely the Anne Margaret space. It was around the corner for him.
Yeah. But I love the Pink Floyd theory that I never thought of those two movies as specifically connected. I love that idea.
Maybe play Dark Side of the Moon.
Watch it sink up. Anyone else? Yes.
Well, I think the thing of the sort of the question was critical appreciation of the Monkees in general, and the fact that if I'm paraphrasing, that at the time there was often expressed this sort of smug hippie disapproval based on organicist principles that were not applied across the board. If I may paraphrase. And I think that was pretty much phased out. I mean, like you said, I think that was pretty much phased out. When I was growing up in the 70s, that would have been a really alien sort of way to judge pop music. I mean, we had ABBA by then, we had Casey and the Sunshine Band. The idea of bands, being in love with the imagery side of it was, didn't seem like any kind of discontinuity with the music. So I think that the whole thing of people being sort of having it out for the Monkees or having an axe to grind against them, I think that's archaic at the point where it's rare to encounter somebody in real life who would actually have that axe to grind about the Monkees.
But how does Jan feel?
I do not know.
Could you ask?
But also look where we are now, where you have who the hell is Nicki Minaj? Nobody knows. You know what I mean? Look at the artifice that goes into creating pop stars. And that's not meant as a diss to Nicki Minaj as much as it is sort of 60s authenticism. They are as much as a product of their time as they are a victim of it.
Well, that's always been true. I mean, you know, Elvis Presley, who was he? He was built up into something that he wasn't actually at root, but it's show business.
Right.
I don't think it's
Beatles,
something new.
Beatles wore, you know, Cuban boots, and they bowed because their manager told them to.
Yeah, it's true.
Artifice is everywhere, awesome is rare. And the awesome quality of the Monkees, to me, is always the most surprising aspect of their history.
Are there any other questions before we? Yes. Could you stand up and
Sure.
it's like real loud?
As great as the music is, does anyone feel it overshadows what a real heart of the Monkees is, which is the television show, at least in my opinion?
I don't think it overshadows it. I think it takes it to another realm. I mean, you're looking at the late 60s where every year was like 10 years culturally. So if you watch the evolution of the television show, like that last episode with Rick Taylor, and like the one where the TVs like hypnotize you, and Mickey directed it, and it's just like
Tim Buckley is the guest star.
yeah, it's crazy. Like the second season goes into these like, you know, it foreshadows head, and it still does it in the same way that you always loved the Monkees television show, which was sort of slapstick, goofball, these beautiful four boys running around in fast motion, a la Hard Day's Night. But then also they'd break the fourth wall. They would call out the fact that this is all a joke, and every once in a while there'd be some extra tape at the end of the episode, and they talk to you as themselves or some version of themselves. And this was just kind of, a couple of leaps forward, but it's still to me the same essence of who they were and who they are, who they were at the time.
You all agree about that?
And that show was great. I mean, it was a great show.
What season is the one where they have the Faustian theme, where the Peter go to the harp?
Peter and the Harp?
Yeah.
Devil and Peter Troy.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful episode.
What else is like on that level?
There were only 2 seasons. I mean, think about that.
Is there anyone else? Can't really see it. If there are no more questions, we may let you go. Drinks are free, of course, after this.
Loder.
Well, thank you very much for being here.